There are men who seem to have everything: the fame, the fortune, the face that launched 1,000 magazine covers. And yet, when you look closely, when you really look, you begin to see the cracks running beneath the surface like fault lines under a city that has never been tested by an earthquake. What does it cost a man to become a legend? What does he leave behind on the altar of greatness that he can never, ever get back? And what if the most heartbreaking part of Leonardo DiCaprio's story isn't the failures, but the victories? What if the life the world envies most is also the life that has cost him the most to live? These are not easy questions. And this is not a comfortable story, but it is a true one. And somewhere in the telling of it, you might just find something that speaks directly to your own life, to your own quiet sacrifices, your own private losses, your own long and winding road toward whatever it is you're still chasing. Stay with this, because what you're about to hear will change the way you see one of the most famous human beings on the planet. Picture a small, narrow apartment on Hillhurst Avenue in Los Feliz, a neighborhood in Los Angeles that existed in the 1970s in a kind of permanent golden haze. Not the glamorous golden haze of Hollywood, but something older, dirtier, more honest. The streets smelled of exhaust and jasmine. The buildings leaned against each other like tired old men. This is where George DiCaprio and Ermeline Indenberken were raising their son, Leonardo Wilhelm DiCaprio, born on November 11, 1974, a boy named after Leonardo da Vinci himself, because his mother felt the baby kick for the first time while she was standing in front of a da Vinci painting in a museum in Florence, Italy. That detail alone tells you something. From the very beginning, this child was being pointed towards something larger than himself, toward art and genius and the kind of beauty that outlasts a human lifetime. But the apartment on Hillhurst was not a place of beauty. It was a place of survival. George and Ermeline divorced when Leonardo was just 1 year old, and the boy grew up shuttling between two very different worlds. His father's bohemian, artistic, unconventional universe, filled with comic books and underground literature, and the strange, magnetic energy of a man who never quite fit into mainstream society, and his mother's quieter, more structured world, where she worked long hours to provide the stability her son needed. Leonardo was the center of both worlds, and yet fully at home in neither. He was a child who learned very early that love and loss arrive together, that the people you need most are sometimes separated from you by forces you cannot control or understand. The neighborhood itself shaped him. Los Feliz in the late 1970s and early 1980s was not a safe place for a child to grow up. There were drug deals happening on corners. There were nights when the sounds coming through the thin apartment walls were not sounds a child should have to hear. Leonardo himself has spoken about watching men inject heroin on the sidewalk outside his building, about the casual violence that lived just beneath the surface of his everyday world. He did not grow up protected from the darkness. He grew up inside it, watching it, absorbing it. And rather than hardening him, it seems to have done something rarer. It made him watchful. It made him observant. It gave him the ability to look at pain directly without flinching, which is perhaps the single most important skill an actor can ever possess. His father, George, was a figure of enormous complexity. A former comic book distributor turned underground artist and poet, George DiCaprio moved through the world with a kind of fierce intellectual curiosity that was both inspiring and destabilizing. He introduced young Leonardo to Bukowski, to the beat poets, to art films that most children would never encounter. He took his son to galleries and screenings and spoke to him as though he were already an adult, already capable of grappling with the full weight of human experience. In many ways, Leonardo's father gave him his inner life, his imagination, his hunger for truth, his refusal to accept the surface of things. But George also gave him something harder to carry, a model of manhood that was defined by restlessness, by the inability to settle, by a perpetual searching that never quite found its destination. And then there was the matter of money, or more precisely, the constant, grinding absence of it. Ermeline worked. She sacrificed. She built a life for her son with whatever she had. But there were years when Leonardo wore clothes from thrift stores, when birthday presents were sparse, when the gap between what his life looked like and what his classmates' lives looked like felt impossibly wide. He has talked about watching other kids with their intact families, their houses with actual yards, their easy confidence, and feeling something complicated in response. Not quite envy, not quite anger, something more like a fierce, quiet determination. A voice inside him that whispered, over and over, I am going to be something. I am going to matter. Just watch. It was a single commercial audition that first lit the fire. A small thing, really, a television advertisement for a toy or a breakfast cereal, the kind of forgettable job that thousands of child actors do and then disappear from. But Leonardo didn't disappear. He walked into that room with an intensity that unnerved the casting directors. He was maybe 10 years old. He had no formal training, no acting classes, no headshots prepared by a pushy stage mother. He had nothing but that raw, watching, absorbing quality, that gift of presence that you cannot teach and cannot manufacture. The casting directors called Ermeline. They told her son had something they almost never saw. She cried. Right there on the phone. She cried. And so began the years of auditions. Years of sitting in waiting rooms with other boys, taller boys, blonder boys, boys whose parents had connections, boys who seemed to carry the casual entitlement of the already chosen. Leonardo was none of those things. He was dark-haired and intense and too smart for his own good. And he was rejected, over and over, with the particular cruelty that only the entertainment industry knows how to deploy. The rejection that comes with a smile, a thanks for coming in, a door closing so quietly you almost convince yourself it wasn't really closed at all. He was dropped from his first agent. Not because he lacked talent, because he refused to change his name. They wanted him to call himself Lenny Williams, something softer, something more American, something that would slide more easily into the mouths of producers who didn't want to be bothered with foreign syllables. Leonardo refused. He was 12 years old, and he refused. He told his mother he would keep his name or he would quit. He would be Leonardo DiCaprio, or he would be no one at all. That refusal, that specific, stubborn, almost reckless act of self-preservation at age 12, that is the moment you need to hold in your mind. Because that is the thread that runs through everything. Every role he would ever play, every choice he would ever make, every sacrifice and every price paid. He would not be reshaped. He would not be softened. He would come to you as himself, fully and uncomfortably himself, or he would not come at all. But refusing to erase yourself comes with its own kind of cost. And in those early teenage years, the cost was visible and heavy. There was a period when Leonardo was close, dangerously close, to walking away from acting altogether. The rejections had piled up into a kind of mountain. He was watching boys his age book commercials, get television series, start climbing the ladder while he stood at the bottom looking up. His father was struggling. His mother was exhausted. And Leonardo, this boy who had told the world, I am going to matter, was sitting in his childhood bedroom wondering if he had been wrong. If the voice inside him had been lying. If the dream was just a dream. There are nights in every life when the darkness is not poetic or cinematic. It is just dark. Just cold. Just real. Leonardo DiCaprio had those nights. He was not protected from them by fame or talent or good fortune. He sat inside them. The same as you have sat inside yours. Wondering if tomorrow would be different. Wondering if the effort was worth the emptiness. Wondering if the hunger inside him was a gift or a curse or simply a wound that had never been properly treated. He almost went in a different direction. His father, ever the unconventional thinker, didn't pressure him toward conventional success. There were conversations about simply living, about making art for its own sake, about rejecting the machinery of Hollywood entirely. And part of Leonardo, the deep, watching, absorbing part, found that appealing. The idea of a life outside the system. A life that couldn't reject him because he had never asked it to accept him. But then came the role that changed everything. It didn't arrive as a thunderclap. It arrived the way real change usually arrives, quietly, almost accidentally, through a door you weren't even sure you were allowed to knock on. He was cast in a recurring role on the sitcom Growing Pains in 1991, playing Luke Brower, a homeless teenager taken in by the Seaver family. It was not a prestigious role. It was not the kind of thing that makes a career, or so everyone thought. But Leonardo brought to it the same fierce specificity he had always carried. That ability to make you believe, completely and without reservation, that you were watching a real person and not an actor playing one. The writers started writing more for his character. The producers started paying attention. And somewhere out there in the audience, people were leaning forward in their living room chairs and saying to whoever was sitting next to them, "Who is that kid?" That question, "Who is that kid?" would follow him for years. Not as a question of obscurity, but as a question of astonishment. Because every time you thought you had figured him out, every time you had placed him comfortably in a category, he did something that shattered the category entirely. The film that truly announced him to the world, not just to television audiences, but to the kind of people who sit in dark theaters and watch movies with the intensity of prayer, was This Boy's Life in 1993, directed by Michael Cotton-Jones and starring Robert De Niro. Leonardo was 18 years old. Robert De Niro was arguably the greatest film actor alive, and they put them in scenes together. These two men separated by decades and continents of experience, and what happened was not what anyone expected. Leonardo did not shrink. He did not defer. He met De Niro head-on, scene after scene, with a fearlessness that was almost physical. You could feel it radiating off the screen like heat. De Niro himself later said that DiCaprio was the only young actor he had ever worked with who truly scared him. Not intimidated him, scared him. There is a difference. Intimidation is about power. Fear is about recognition. De Niro recognized something in the 18-year-old boy from Los Feliz that he knew, bone deep, was the real thing. And then came Gilbert Grape. What's Eating Gilbert Grape, released in 1993, directed by Lasse Hallström, is the film that contains what many still consider the single greatest performance of DiCaprio's entire career. He played Arnie Grape, a young man with a developmental disability, with such complete and terrifying commitment that audiences genuinely did not know he was acting. His co-star Johnny Depp has said he had no idea how Leonardo was doing what he was doing. The director has said he sometimes forgot to call cut because he was so lost in watching it happen. Leonardo was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. He was 19 years old. 19. And yet, and here is where the story turns in a direction you might not expect, the Oscar did not come. It went to Tommy Lee Jones for The Fugitive. Leonardo sat in that audience, 19 years old, having given what the entire industry acknowledged was an extraordinary performance, and he watched someone else take the award. He smiled. He applauded. He was gracious and warm and showed nothing of what must have been happening inside him. But something did happen inside him. Something shifted. Something that would take years, decades, to fully understand. Because the Oscar losses became the defining rhythm of his early career. In 1994, he starred in The Quick and the Dead, and then came Romeo and Juliet in 1996, Baz Luhrmann's explosive, neon-soaked reimagining of Shakespeare's tragedy, which turned Leonardo DiCaprio into something that can only be described as a global phenomenon. Teenage girls screamed at his public appearances with a fervor that recalled Beatlemania. His face was on the walls of bedrooms in 50 countries. He could not walk down a street without being mobbed. And he hated it. Not the success, not the work, but the machinery around the work. The loss of the ordinary life he had never quite been able to afford, but had always imagined he would have someday. The inability to disappear into a crowd, to sit in a cafe alone, to walk through a city without being recognized and consumed. The fame he had spent his childhood reaching for had arrived, and it had brought with it a particular and permanent loneliness that no one in his life had warned him about. Then came the ship. Titanic, 1997. James Cameron. The most expensive film ever made at the time. A production so vast, so costly, so logistically insane that multiple studios had walked away from it. And Cameron chose Leonardo DiCaprio, 22 years old, beautiful, magnetic, already famous but not yet mythological, to play Jack Dawson, the young drifter who wins a ticket aboard the doomed ocean liner and falls in love with a girl from a world that was never meant to be his. The film became the highest-grossing movie in history at the time. It ran in theaters for nearly a year. People watched it dozens of times. They wept at the same moments, every time. The image of Leonardo DiCaprio standing at the bow of that great ship, arms spread, face turned to the open ocean, became one of the most recognizable images of the 20th century. And the blue-green ocean that surrounds that ship, that vast, cold, indifferent ocean, became the symbol that would follow Leonardo DiCaprio for the rest of his life. Because the ocean does not care about fame. The ocean does not care about beauty or talent or box office records. The ocean simply is. And Leonardo, in some private and essential part of himself, knew that. He had always known that. He did not win the Oscar for Titanic. The backlash against the film's popularity was swift and intellectually snobbish and deeply unfair. But it was real. And Leonardo DiCaprio, the boy who had refused to change his name at 12, who had met Robert De Niro as an equal at 18, who had made Johnny Depp forget he was watching a performance, that boy now found himself being dismissed as a pretty face, as a phenomenon rather than an artist, as someone who had happened to be standing in the right place when the wave of mass culture crashed against the shore. He disappeared, not literally, but professionally. He pulled back from the kind of films that had made him famous and started making choices that bewildered his management team, alienated some of his fan base, and confused the industry that thought it had understood him. He made The Man in the Iron Mask in 1998. He took 3 years away from films entirely after Titanic, returning in 2000 with The Beach, a film that divided audiences and critics. He was searching for something. You could see it in every choice, a restlessness, an insistence on complicating himself, on refusing to be the thing the world had decided he was. And then came the collaboration that would define the second chapter of his career. Martin Scorsese. Gangs of New York in 2002 was the beginning of one of the great director-actor partnerships in the history of cinema. 5 films together over 2 decades: Gangs of New York, The Aviator, The Departed, Shutter Island, The Wolf of Wall Street. Each one a masterwork. Each one a new reinvention. Each one Leonardo DiCaprio dismantling the previous version of himself and building something rawer, stranger, more honest in its place. The Aviator in 2004 earned him his second Academy Award nomination. He played Howard Hughes, billionaire, visionary, obsessive, broken, with a precision and a pain that felt almost confessional. People who knew DiCaprio personally said he had never seemed so close to a character. The isolation of Hughes, the inability to trust, the way that extraordinary success had not cured his loneliness but had merely given it a more expensive address. These were things Leonardo understood from the inside. He lost the Oscar again, to Jamie Foxx for Ray. The Departed in 2006. No nomination. Inception in 2010. No nomination. The Great Gatsby in 2013. No nomination. Django Unchained in 2012. Nominated, but did not win. The Wolf of Wall Street in 2013. Nominated, did not win. Year after year, loss after loss, while the internet turned his non-victories into a cultural joke. Leonardo DiCaprio can't win an Oscar. The memes, the gifs, the late-night television segments. And through all of it, he smiled. He attended. He applauded. He was gracious. He showed nothing. But those who worked closely with him during this period describe a man carrying something heavy. A man who had begun to wonder, privately and painfully, whether the world would ever see him the way he saw himself. His personal life became its own kind of complicated story. A succession of relationships with Gisele Bündchen, Bar Raffaelli, Blake Lively, Aaron Hetherton, Tony Garn. Each one followed intensely by the press, each one ending before it fully began, each departure quietly noted and quickly analyzed. The pattern became its own narrative. Why couldn't he commit? Why couldn't he build the ordinary life he claimed to want? And beneath those questions, asked by strangers who knew only the surface of things, lived a quieter, more honest question. Can a man who gave everything to his work learn to give something real to another person? He has no children. He has spoken about this with an honesty that is rare in Hollywood. He has said he wonders about it. He has said he isn't sure what kind of father he would have been, given the father he had, given the life he has lived, given the way his attention has always curved, inevitably, back toward the work. There is no triumph in this part of his story. There is no reinvention. There is only a man sitting with a choice he may or may not have made consciously, looking at the space where a different life might have been. And then, finally, after 22 years of nominations and losses and memes and gracious smiles, The Revenant. 2015. Alejandro González Iñárritu's brutal, beautiful, relentless film about a frontiersman named Hugh Glass who is mauled by a bear, left for dead, and crawls back toward life through the frozen wilderness of the American frontier. Leonardo slept inside animal carcasses. He ate raw bison liver. He filmed in genuinely sub-zero temperatures for months. He gave himself, completely and without reservation, to a performance that was more physical ordeal than artistic exercise. And on February 28, 2016, at the 88th Academy Awards, 41 years old, on his 6th nomination, Leonardo Wilhelm DiCaprio walked to the stage of the Dolby Theater in Hollywood and finally held the Oscar in his hands. He did not cry. He gripped it. He held it the way a man holds something he has earned through a kind of suffering the world cannot fully see. And when he spoke, he did not talk about himself. He talked about climate change. He talked about the planet. He talked about the indigenous peoples who had helped make the film. He stood in the brightest spotlight on Earth and pointed it somewhere else, away from himself, toward something larger. That is who he has become, or perhaps who he always was. The boy from Hillhurst Avenue who looked at the world and decided, before he was old enough to fully understand what he was deciding, that he was going to care about it. Really care. Not in the way that celebrities care, writing a check and posting a photograph, but in the bone-deep, years of work, funding research, and sitting in meetings with scientists way of a man for whom environmentalism is not a cause, but a calling. The Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation, established in 1998, the year after Titanic, when the wave of his fame was at its very peak, has directed more than $100 million toward environmental causes, protecting wild places, funding climate science, advocating for indigenous land rights. He has used the machinery of his celebrity, that machinery he so often hated and resisted, and bent it towards something that will outlast him. He was 50 in November 2024, 51 now. And the question that the world keeps asking about him is not about his next film or his next relationship. It is something quieter and stranger. It is the question of whether a man who has achieved everything the world told him to want has found the thing the world forgot to mention, the thing underneath the achievement, the thing that makes achievement feel like it means something. And now I need to speak directly to you. You have been sitting with this story. Maybe you recognized something in it. The refusal to change your name, metaphorically speaking. The room full of people who seemed more qualified, more connected, more destined for the thing you wanted. The losses that piled up until they began to look like evidence. Evidence that maybe you were wrong about yourself. Evidence that maybe the voice inside you was lying. But look at what happened when he held that ship's railing. Look at what happened when he stood at the bow of that great vessel with the cold ocean stretching out in every direction, not knowing, none of us knowing, what waited ahead. He didn't stand there because he had already won. He stood there because he had decided, somewhere deep and irrevocable, to keep going. To keep refusing to become someone smaller than himself. To keep choosing the work and the planet and the truth of things, even when the world was making a joke out of his losses. The ocean he stood before in 1997 is still there. What is your ocean? What is the thing in your life that is larger than your ambition, larger than your ego, larger than your hunger for recognition? What is the thing you would work for even if no one ever handed you an award for it? Leonardo DiCaprio at 51 is not a man who has arrived. He is a man still walking, still searching, still refusing, as he has refused since he was 12 years old in a casting office, to become anything less than what he knows himself to be. The question is not whether he will find peace. The question, the one I am leaving with you now, the one I hope follows you out of this video and into whatever you are building, whatever you are fighting for, whatever you are refusing to give up on. is whether you will give yourself the same stubborn, costly, magnificent refusal. Will you?